Hey there, welcome back to Return to Yehovah. I'm, outside. We're actually not getting rain for the moment, so I thought I'd get outside a little bit. Sorry if it's a little shaky, trying to figure out the best way to set up the camera thing. But anyhow, a while back somebody had suggested I talk about, some practical ways to keep the Torah or the commandments or whatever, and not that I'm an expert by any means. But one thing I made some notes about, and I think it's a common thing, is what to do about the Sabbath. Now, not about the date, ins and outs of when you get up, what should you do first, or, nothing like that. Just more along the lines of like working on the Sabbath. Like, what if you have a job that is either, some jobs are critical, like being doctors, nurses, cops, firemen, a lot of things. If you're a caretaker for people, or there's a lot of jobs where, at least from the employer's point of view and maybe from the public's point of view, they need you. They need somebody to be working on the Sabbath, unless you are blessed enough to be living, which I don't know anybody that is really, in a community where everybody honors and keeps the Sabbath, then you wouldn't have to worry about it. But since most of us live out in the world somewhere and we don't have that luxury, we kind of, have to work with what we have, okay? Now, I realize everybody has to do what they have to do. If you aren't working, you're good. If you are working and your boss or your employer requires you to be there on a Saturday, maybe you could see if there's a way to change your schedule without making you out to be like some, fanatic religious person or something like that. You don't necessarily have to go, threaten to sue the company and things like that. And believe me, there's people that go to those extremes, for reasons that are kind of silly, really. But I just don't think Torah observant believers in Yeshua should be, rabble-rouser, troublemaker types that just make, bosses and co-workers hate them or hate the whole type of person that they are. You know what I mean? But I'll tell you, years ago, before I even knew about the Sabbath being on a Saturday, I was, still a believer, but I was working as a police officer, and, our hours were constantly rotating. You'd work 5 days on and then 2 days off, and then it was 5 days and 3 days off. And, it was fine, but if you wanted to try to go to church on Sunday, which is what I did at the time, there was plenty of weeks where you had to work. You just had no option. And, you can't just say, oh, can I please take another Sunday off, or, whatever. So I decided to pray about it. I'm just giving you, what worked for me or what happened for me. But so I prayed about it, and I said, Lord, I'd really like to, be able to go to church on Sunday or whatever, and, be part of a church and active in it, and, all of that kind of stuff. I don't know if it was weeks or months later. I don't know. It wasn't like years, but sometime later, an opportunity came up, and in fact, the people who had the job opening came to me. They sought me out and asked me if I'd like to take that job. And and it was within the same department, but a different job that I hadn't done before. And I was like, it was a good job. It was Monday through Friday, daytime hours. I won't go into all of that, but the bottom line was it was a good job, a little bit more pay even, and I had the weekends off. So I was able to have, Sundays and all of that. And I say Sundays because that's all I knew about at the time. But that was back in like 2001. And it wasn't until 2006, early of 2006, that I even had a clue about the Torah. Okay, so for 5 years, I had weekends off, and I was able to be involved in, church on Sunday, and, tried to do what I could to, be active and all that. But then, what I look back now and think how clever God is he actually made it so that I also had the Sabbath off. I didn't realize it until 2006, but So now, the job I had already gave me weekends off. So I was for many years, until I just recently retired, about 9 or 10 months ago. But so I actually was able to have, Sabbaths off, the weekly Sabbath. And of course, since we know that the Sabbaths that go along with the different feasts of the Lord, or the feasts of Yehovah, many of those days are, Sabbaths, or days that we are not supposed to work, and they don't usually fall on the weekend. You have to be able to take some time off. But I had vacation, or comp time, they call it, so I was always able to work that out, and so in a way I had it good or easy, whatever. And I'm not saying it's easy for everybody, I realize that, and I know there's people out there that just have not found a way that they can not work on the Sabbath sometimes. But I don't think you should beat yourself up and think that you've just failed the Lord or something like that, because I don't really think it's quite like that. But I do think there's a difference. And keep in mind, God knows our hearts, but He looks at it as if you are able to be off, in a legitimate way, without being a troublemaker or a bad employee. If you're able to be off on the Sabbath, and you so you can do it, then He would expect you to not work on the Sabbath, but He also knows if your heart is such that you can make more money working on the Sabbath, so you choose to, or maybe some jobs will pay you extra if you work on a weekend or whatever. So if you're doing it just for that, unless you have to, cover a bunch of medical bills. There's a million different variables, okay, and each person has to look at them themselves. But I guess the reality is there's no one set rule, okay, especially living out here, wherever you may be, other than in the land of Israel, with fellow believers that all keep the Sabbath the same way and all that. Then of course there's gonna, you're gonna have to just work with what you have. So all I would say, and this is just my opinion from, trying to do this walk for, 12, 13 years, whatever. Don't beat yourself up, but, do what you can. But if you can't get off, then just be the best employee you can. Try not to be a complainer and a troublemaker and all that. But ask the Lord to open a door for you to, be able to have the Sabbath off. And He can do anything. My gosh, trust me. Another thing related to this, I'm looking at some notes because I had written these down. Let's see here. Oh, and one little thing I was going to say, I've known some people, and I don't fault them, but if I was the employer, I wouldn't be real happy. You don't want to be like calling in sick every time it's a Sabbath or whatever. Bosses tend to see those patterns, and they'll figure it out, and they'll either punish you in some way or maybe fire you, and that's not necessarily helpful if you need the money for your family. But another thing I was going to talk about related to the Sabbath is what about helping others on the Sabbath? Now, that may seem like a no-brainer. Most of you hearing this would go, well, of course, but I remember years ago, and I feel like I might have shared this once, but I don't know if I did. Maybe it was just writing it down, but where I had a good friend whose mother had just lost her husband, and so she was a widow, lived alone, of course, and she lived down in another state, but she needed help cleaning out a lot of her house and wanted to get rid of a lot of the extra junk, because she and this was actually her second husband, and he had been a widower, and so they had a lot of stuff between the two of them, as people do. And so she needed help, and of course I worked Monday through Friday, but her son and I were best friends, and so we would go down on the weekends, usually like a Friday afternoon or after work, and then be with her through the weekend. But we ended up working on Saturday and Sunday, helping her clean out all this stuff and take stuff to Goodwill or whatever. And that was for several weeks too, going down and coming back and all that. And now plenty of people could have, judged me or chastised me for working on the Sabbath and all that. And I did, kind of wrestle with it a little bit, except I'm like, well, I know I'm helping, for one, a widow, a lady that I've known for years. I was best friends with her son, and actually he had health problems, so I knew he couldn't do it. And even though she had a couple other sons, both of them had physical issues, like bad backs and this, that, and the other. So I was like the healthiest one of the bunch at the time, but I was able to help, and so I did. And I'm not looking for a pat on the back or anything. I'm just saying, even though it was on the Sabbath, I felt like, you had to weigh between what's right and wrong. And, I would hate to think if I just refused to help them and said, no, I can't. Saturday is my Sabbath. I have to, go to church or whatever I would have said. That would not have helped bring them or help them see anything redeeming about, following the Torah or anything like that. So yes, God has, the letter of his law, but I think the spirit of it is, if you have to weigh between not working on the Sabbath and doing some work to help someone that needs it and can't get it any other way, it should be obvious. And it really wasn't a huge struggle. I just did it, and I believed I was doing the right thing. And even looking back now, I still do, Not everybody has to agree. That's okay. I've not been sent by God to tell you what to do. I'm just offering my opinion. And in case you're in a situation where you're not sure what you should or shouldn't do, these are just some examples. But yeah, I think I'll close it for now. That's just some ideas, but things to consider, okay? Yehovah bless you and keep you, and we'll be back sometime later. Shalom.